Another franchise that's an obvious moneymaker in terms of fans and in terms of people buying merchandise and people going to conventions is Stargate. And each one of the Stargate shows, has their own fans, but those fans rally together around Stargate. And here's the thing about Stargate is that Stargate was put on regular cable. So people in nursing homes, people in airports, people in hospitals, just people anywhere were able to watch Stargate. So there's a bunch of fans of Stargate that aren't vocal on the internet, that aren't making videos on the internet. So there's a huge audience for Stargate. Now, Amazon has owned the Stargate franchise, I think, for the last 10 years. And the only thing they tried to do with it was they had made some failed pilot that had nothing to do with the show. It had nothing to do with the movie. And the pilot had to do with a little girl in the 1930s, all right, who finds a bracelet, and it had nothing to do with Stargate. Here's the thing. Before, and then since Amazon has, they really haven't paid attention to it, they've just ignored it, and we haven't gotten one thing from Stargate from Amazon. And what's so weird about that is The Expanse got a couple of seasons from Amazon, right? Which that show should have gone on. It should be going on now. There should have been, it should have never ended. Should have never ended. Expanse should have never ended. Okay, so Stargate was a lot more popular than The Expanse. You have to realize Stargate had like 13 seasons, multiple movies, aside from the theatrical one that was released while the show was being released. That show had its own movies that weren't released in the movie theater. They were like straight to DVD. And the spin offs lasted for 5 seasons, like Stargate Atlantis. And Stargate Universe was 2 seasons. It wasn't only 1 season, it was at least 2 seasons. And apart from that, you see the fans go to conventions, to meet the stars. And Stargate is something that's talked about. They said, remember, Stargate SG-1 was canceled on Showtime after 1 season. And the Sci-Fi Channel picked it up, and it became one of the most popular shows. And it lasted for 10 seasons. And then they had Stargate Atlantis. They had Stargate Universe. Alright? But, Stargate SG-1 was around for like 13 years or more. And if Amazon, if they would have just continued, they can come back, but Amazon could have had a hit show all those years. The way that Star Trek had a following with conventions, Stargate could have had its own conventions. But talk about Amazon totally not caring for a franchise. But I thought Amazon cared about money. Because if Amazon cared about money, look at all the shows they put on Prime that are just so ridiculous, so boring. There's like no story, right? I can think of a couple of shows here. Okay? The Man in the High Tower. Talk about a show that is like so boring. It has like a good premise, but I don't know. Man in the High Tower, that was boring to me. And what other shows are they putting out? I can't even tell you. Rings of Power? Seriously? Uh, Stargate SG-1 had a fraction, a small, tiny fraction of the budget Rings of Power had. And they were able to make blockbuster cinematic level uh, stories. Okay? So that's all I'm saying is that um, what's going on with Stargate at Amazon? That Sci-Fi Channel was able to churn out 13 seasons and make shows people actually wanted to see. You know, Stargate, these were shows that people were excited about, right? We were excited for a new season of Stargate. And I'm looking at all these streaming services, and I've canceled a lot of the streaming services. Like the first one being Apple, because after this season of Severance, they're really not releasing anything. And if you're a streaming service and we're paying month to month, you have to be releasing week after week something new, something to talk about. At least in terms of science fiction. You know, at least in terms of science fiction, they got to be putting out something week to week that has to do with sci-fi. So, Stargate is an obvious one for Prime Video. And I was just looking at all the things in Prime Video. What is there to watch in Prime Video? You know? And I'm like, you know what? I am this close. I think that's the next one I'm going to cancel is Prime Video, because The Expanse literally finished like 7 or 8 years ago, right? They need to be churning out something. And if they own Stargate, I think they've owned Stargate since 2012, and it's been more than 10 years. And you're telling me they can't do a revival of SG-1, a revival of Stargate Atlantis with how popular science fiction is? You're going to tell me science fiction isn't popular with Elon Musk around? So, you know, the Fallout show was great. Where is Fallout Season 2? You know, Fallout Season 1 came out last year. They should have Season 2 ready. Ready and filming already. You know? So this is they're holding this thing called CINEMACON. They're announcing a bunch of stuff that is irrelevant over there. Irrelevant. Because there's real franchises that have real loyal audiences. And my question is this: why are these franchises being ignored? Why is Battlestar Galactica being ignored? Why is Stargate being ignored? And this is why I'm worried about Amazon buying James Bond. Because I feel like they're just buying James Bond and they're not going to do anything with it for the next 10 years. Alright? And then, you know, they're ignoring franchises that have clear followings. People rally together to celebrate these franchises at conventions. And you see it when you're looking at a panel, right? Like at a Stargate panel, and the room is jam-packed. So my question is this: why aren't, with all the streaming services, right? Fringe, X-Files, even Farscape, right? Stargate, Sliders. Stargate was a big reason why other shows on Sci-Fi Channel got green lit. Alright? Stargate was like Sci-Fi Channel's gem. And what's weird to me is Stargate was so big on TV. Stargate was so big on TV. But it was also a blockbuster franchise. So they could have both. They could have a movie, right? They could have their movies, and maybe, look, maybe their first movie that comes out doesn't make $1 billion. But maybe the third Stargate film that hits the box office makes more than $1 billion, right? Because there is already stars like Jason Momoa who had starred on the series. So you have all these things, and you know, if there was a showrunner I would talk to for the reboot, I would definitely talk to Ron Moore, the Battlestar guy, or the Andor people. And if not that, talk to the people who made the original SG1 series. You know, get those people together and just revive Stargate, because they could do the shows and then they could also do theatrical movies. And let me tell you, there would be people willing to pay IMAX level tickets to see Stargate, even the past Stargate that came out in the 90s in IMAX. But they need to release a new one. They need to release a new Stargate movie, a new Stargate show. This is an obvious moneymaker. This is an obvious moneymaker. So,